All right, everybody. Welcome to this episode of the Lemme Splain podcast. I am here with Beth Jaswa to discuss what it is like to have, shall we say, a nonconformist path or career entry in tech and how that has served her as she has progressed through her career. How's it going today, Beth?
It's going well.
So just for the people who do not know you, would you like to take a minute and explain kind of who you are and what your current position is and where you work?
Yes, I'm currently the director of engineering at Campspot. I didn't start in engineering. I started in hospitality. I worked in hotels and corporate catering, and eventually decided it was time to make a switch and got into writing software via a 6-month full-time boot camp. And then I was an engineer for a while and really wanted to get back into management. So that's why I ended up being the engineering manager. And then now I manage engineering managers, and I've held teams and done a variety of stuff while I've been at Campspot for the last 2 years.
Awesome. So we'll talk about what Campspot is because I actually think the business model is super interesting and a great way to kind of speak to a niche market that I honestly never thought of until I started chatting with you. But let's kind of go back to the beginning of it, where you initially went to college or you went to university and your degree is not in tech at all. So your degree is in hospitality, correct?
Yeah, I have a Bachelor of Business Administration, and my major was hospitality.
Okay, so you get your degree, and like all of us, you get the degree, you think this is what you're going to be doing. So you go out into the world and you are working in hospitality. Do you want to talk a little bit about what your experience was there and kind of the skills that you picked up from that?
Yeah, as part of my college, I had to do an internship over the summer, and I was working in events in hotels, and that's what I ended up doing for about the first couple of years after college. I was what we call a banquet captain, which is basically like the supervisor of events at hotels. I could have staff in multiple rooms running multiple events. Maybe it's just one. Maybe you're the server today. You really just pitch in and do whatever is needed in that industry. And typically I was also paired up to be the restaurant manager for times that weren't very awesome to be there. So that could be like Sunday nights. I was actually the entire hotel manager, fresh out of college, because no one really wanted to be the manager on duty at that time. So that was me. So what I got to learn from that was juggling a variety of things, very schedule sort of oriented. Definitely, I would start my day and I would look at, I think they were called our BEOs, banquet event orders. I would read them through the day, figure out, sort of see okay, this is how many people we're going to have on this event. This is when I need to check in here. This one's going to maybe be a little bit more needy. This one's pretty simple.
Right.
And sort of plan through that. The restaurant shifts, there's different types of servers. So you either like banquets or you like restaurants. So they're very different. But typically the servers were in, especially my second role, a finer dining situation. And so that was an interesting feel because the hotel had to have a full kitchen, but we didn't necessarily have a lot of people. And so it was really unpredictable as to how much would come in. And I got to organize our wine list. So that was a big project that I sort of took my own initiative on because I really liked wine and I had a lot of spare time at night. So that's what I ended up doing. And then creating a manual for the servers to be able to describe the wine. We actually ended up selling more wine after I did that, and I didn't get to taste any of the wine because those bottles hadn't been opened. But I liked wine enough and just tried to research them and do my best. And so what I take from that is that you just sort of have to find what problems are and how you can be most effective at your time. I'm definitely one person that doesn't usually sit around and twiddle my thumbs.
Right.
I find ways to make myself useful.
Yeah, and I think that's awesome. So you did the thing, you followed the path you thought you were supposed to do, you were trying to see where you could make it better. And then eventually, I guess the nicest way to put it is you kind of fell out of love with it a little bit.
Well, as much as I liked working in hotels, I was typically the nights and weekends, which really wasn't super awesome after I got married. I wanted to have my schedule align more with my husband. That's how I moved into corporate catering. And then I had a variety of roles there, which was really engaging. And then at some point, I knew that I probably had capped out there. And I really didn't want to go back to hotels. And so that's sort of when I was like, okay, let's look around. Like, what else could I do? I had always loved spreadsheets, problem solving, tech. Like I was creating like digital menu signage at the time when I was working at Google Boulder. So like I had a lot of tech folk around me, including my husband. And he was like, I really think you would like coding. You should try that.
Okay. So he managed to convince you, and you figured you'd give coding a try. So you decided to try a boot camp, correct?
Yep. I can remember quitting my job and it was just sort of crazy, but I did the math and calculated out like, you know, how much paying for boot camp was versus my last salary and what the new salary would be after I was a dev. And I was like, you know what, I just have to try this for a few years and it's not like a big deal. This sort of seems like, why not? Like we were in a place where we could do that. So yeah, I took the leap and just sort of jumped into it.
Cool. So you're in this boot camp, learning an entirely new job, basically. What, like, everybody has a different stack. So what stack did you guys learn in your boot camp? Like, and was it a stack that you actually ended up using at your first job? Because sometimes it's two different things.
Yeah, we learned Ruby on Rails, which I think Ruby was good to start off with. Rails was opinionated. So I think that was another reason. And then so the first half of the 6 months was Ruby on Rails and some like basic CSS and HTML. And then the last 3 months, they wanted us to learn a JavaScript framework, front-end framework. And at that time, it was like, oh, Angular 2 is going to be really different. We don't know what it's going to be. So we ended up learning Ember.js. I did towards the end of the class, like take one of my simple front ends and also write it in Angular just because I wanted to see what it would look like, because I was also seeing that come up a lot on job postings. My first job was writing TypeScript, which I hadn't used before. So I was using Node. And I was also writing native iOS, which I knew nothing about. The first 2 weeks that I worked there was literally taking tutorial classes and building stuff like that. So no, I did not work in that. I've never professionally done Ruby on Rails or Ember. The job I had even after my first one, I was working in PHP. And then later we had Angular.
So this is honestly kind of hilarious because I spoke to Sarah Cawley, who you know from West, the other day. And she actually said that one of the things that she works with in the boot camp she runs is helping people get really comfortable with the fact that they're going to Google. And and so like, and did you have the kind of that same onboarding where you realized that you're going to spend a lot of your was the fact that you had to switch from the boot camp stack to what they were actually using, was there a moment where you're like, I am basically just going to Google the bejesus out of my job moving forward?
So that's what I think was probably the biggest generic takeaway from the boot camp was learning how to learn in the tech space. So the last 3 months, our teacher, like we had like a primary teacher for the first and then another teacher for the last 3. And he ended up not being so great. But what that meant for us is that we basically had to learn that on our own, which honestly, that's what we do at work anyway. So I'm sort of glad for that experience. It would have been helpful to have maybe a little bit more hands-on from him. But frankly, at the end of the day, you're just going to be on Stack Overflow. You're going to Google around, find some blog post. You're going to have to resource that way. Which was fascinating is that the second job that I had, that code base, they wrote their own framework, own ORM. There was nothing you could Google aside from how to do something in PHP or Postgres. Like that was it. everything else was within the code base. And so that was a little nerve-wracking at first, that like, you can't Stack Overflow this. But what it did teach me was you need to go search the repo and figure out how it's structured and organized. And after doing that enough, it was like, oh, I generally have an idea where this type of stuff would be. So what was a little nerve-wracking, I had already practiced that while learning Ember. And so I like got through it.
Which, if, you know, I can take a moment and be slightly technologically sanctimonious, is yet another story about the importance of documentation.
Oh, 100%. I mean, the PHP one, there was some documentation within the code base. Some of those devs also believed in self-documenting code. Sometimes there were paragraphs above the
comments.
In comments. But you know, we joked it was old enough to vote, so like it had been around for a while, and it had evolved, and you know, we had like 3 different comment modules, because that's just they were really big into building your own and had a lot of space in the early days of not utilizing libraries that already existed. So yeah, they wrote their own.
Definitely an adventure. So you did your entry level, and then you went to kind of the in-betweeny job where you were like, oh my God, I'm going to have to learn everything all over again. And so there you were with like a couple of years of dev under your belt, and you kind of decided that you wanted to start to move up. Can you talk a little bit about how you made that shift, considering that you weren't what would be considered, shall we say, a traditional candidate or a traditional tech team member?
Yeah, it was actually pretty hard for that second role. When I joined, I saw some things that I thought I could help improve the team. But again, at the time, I was the junior member, like lowest person on the totem pole, and really wasn't trying to rock the boat, and needed to really focus in on my technical skills. That said, in a couple of years, when that spot was more available, I basically leaned into just picking up tasks. So similar to hospitality, you know, picking up, making the wine list. What I was doing there was we were starting to get into Jira, starting to try to do Agile. I just leaped into it. I had already done some Agile in boot camp. I was like, I can organize the project, no big deal. I was working with like the most senior person on our team, and he was like, you take it. I've done this in a past life. Like, you can just do this. So I organized the project. I worked with our designer of like, okay, here's what you want to do. We're going to have to roll this out in at least 4 different steps. And I'm really glad that he gave me that opportunity to the other senior dev to do that, because he could have. But what I did, I just took and ran with that and did a couple different projects and basically prototyped and advocated to the rest of the team that like, Agile's not going to be scary. It will be fine. This is how we can do it. Roll with it, iterate on it. And it gives greater visibility to the rest of the company, which is something that we were looking to get. And yeah, it really helped me. I don't know if I would say make a name for myself, but in some regards, it was like, oh, if Beth's on this project, like she's going to get it done.
Right. So it's almost, you know, like it was your wine list in a way.
Yeah, it truly was. I mean, I was leaning in hard. Was that exactly my job description? Nope. It totally wasn't, because I basically was taking on like a project lead, tech lead, and then eventually sort of like a team lead role. So I did have to, eventually I went into like a team lead role to try to see how that was doing, particularly when we didn't have an engineering manager.
Right.
So I leaned hard into that. And then was trying to make a case for, yes, I know I've only been a dev for 3 years, but in my previous industry, I managed people at multiple events, and I got this.
Right. So you were able to take that past management work and just a willingness to think outside the box and take on stuff and work outside your role and see if you could parlay that over. So the question then becomes, were they open to that? Because sometimes you try that and they are not cool with it. And sometimes you try that and they're like, yeah, sure. So what kind of reception did you receive?
Yeah, it was not great. I applied for the job and told my CTO that I'd applied for the job, and we had been talking about it. But there was, another one-on-one one time. I remember him saying that we had no qualified applicants. He knew that I had applied. We had talked about it. So I remember thinking like, well, I have been practically doing the job. Not officially like HR managing the people, but I was organizing the team, doing the Scrum Master thing, doing the projects. At that company, we didn't have product. And so basically I needed to go talk to various stakeholders within the company, and I needed to figure out what they wanted and requirements. And like, I was keeping things on track.
Yep.
And also at the time, I was pregnant with my daughter, and I didn't want to share that until I knew what was going on, if I was going to get this engineering manager role or not. So somehow I made it through the first trimester, even though I was sleepy as all get out, just like busted my tail at work and doing my dev role, and then also all of those project management sort of tasks at the same time.
And a happy ending to the story. Eventually, you won, so to speak.
I did. I eventually got the role, so I'm not sure exactly how they needed to play that out or who had doubt, but I made sure I brought it during that sort of like trial period. Got the role. Initially, they gave me just the devs on the team, and then eventually QA, and then eventually the sysadmin. So I had the entire software department. That was about 10 people of the company.
Awesome. So one of the things that we talked about when you and I first started discussing this, that was genuinely one of the most accurate descriptions of software management, was that you described running an engineering department as like a really weird game of Settlers of Catan.
Oh, yeah.
So for people that haven't played, that perhaps are not playing Risk or Settlers of Catan, would you like to describe how that is and kind of how what that is and how it all fits together? Because literally when you told me that, when we were talking about this before, I think I had to stop for like 30 seconds to get over my, oh my God, that's true laughter. So I kind of would love to have you lean into that.
Yeah, so at Settlers of Catan, you have varying resources. We can just call it basically same, your resources and tech, your variety of skill sets and your people. Maybe that's money or tools that you have. And then you've got to sort of know who you're working with and you're playing with. So understanding your different stakeholders, and then planning multiple scenarios. And I'm trying to figure out, what does leadership want? What does this individual like stakeholder manager want? What does my team want to do? What do I personally think we should be doing? And craft a bunch of scenarios up, because inevitably at some point in the game, it's called the robber, is going to come and take half your resources, or basically throw you an epic curveball. Maybe somebody leaves. Maybe leadership is like, nope, I want this like massive big project instead. Like something is going to come along, and you just got to be prepared for it. And so, yeah, I mean, I think at like a high level, that's how a lot of different games are, and like jobs, not just like in engineering, but when you're taking in inputs from a variety of places and then trying to make the most people happy and be efficient and keep your people happy, you've just got to like play a bunch of things around. I've done the Gallup Strengths Finder. I don't know if you've heard too much about those. A Ranger is one of my top 5. Nice. And that is all about just like that. I'm going to play Tetris. It's no big deal. I'm going to take this in and move it around and rejigger it. And how that shows up other places is like making things more efficient, rejiggering projects, like roll with the punches, no problem.
Right. So the good news is, and we didn't discuss this, but I have actually been a banquet server. So yeah. That was what I did after college, was I was a banquet server, or after high school, excuse me. So I really like the fact that you were able to, because for anybody that hasn't done weddings, to say that anything can happen when you are doing multiple weddings is an understatement. Like the stuff that you will see happen when you're just running wedding after wedding, oh, sometimes there is so much drama. So I really like that you are able to take the roll with it skills from hospitality and transfer that into your workplace. I guess my question then becomes, how did that, I mean, this is right, wrong, or indifferent. This is the joy of being a woman in technology, and especially a woman in management in technology, is that you have to figure out the line between kind of adding humanity to a workplace, which often is what women end up doing in a work group, but also still being a manager and having that authority and getting the work done. And, you know, something you and I have talked about has been like compassion with efficiency. And I really liked that you expressed that sentiment. So do you want to talk a little bit about how that has translated into your management style?
Yeah, I definitely try to be available for people to talk to. I've gotten that feedback on reviews and other things, that I'm easy to talk to. I make myself available, even if I've got a packed schedule. And that's not necessarily meaning that I work crazy hours or respond to, you know, Slack messages in random hours. But I think making sure that I take the time. Part of that, for me, is also having very strategic questions that I would ask in my one-on-ones. Some of that would be sort of stay-related questions. Some of that would be, what are you looking for in your career? Initiating those growth conversations. A lot of people don't offer that information, but it was useful for me. I would ask them certain questions like, what is fun to you? How can we inject more fun into your job? And that second part is really more for me to figure out, but it's like trying to understand from them, like, what do they like? What do they not like? And so if I know those things, I can plan for those, and I can try to give them the projects or that they either need to stretch themselves, or it's just something that I know they'd like, and maybe they'd get through it faster or just have a happiness factor. So I also take a lot of notes, and that's another way that really helps me remember all of those variety of conversations that I have, and then bring some of those points back up, especially if like I ask for them to go or encourage them to go think about a topic or do an action item.
No, I like that, because sometimes you'll discuss something in a one-on-one and it just never comes up again. And you're not sure if your boss actually cared about it or they were just filling time with you for that week. But what I also find interesting is that you are putting that emphasis on not just your documentation, but also documentation. Sounds like because you were at the company that commented the bejesus out of the song Old Enough to Vote, that you and I have the shared philosophy that documentation is a form of workplace compassion. Like, yeah. That is a form of creating a better culture, is actually writing things down.
It absolutely is. And then also getting people to do the thing that you want them to do. I call them sometimes like gentle nudges. Sometimes they might eventually not be as gentle, but they start out as like, I ask you a question, like maybe a very specific question, and I could just answer it. I could just answer it immediately in Slack. That would be the easier thing to do. Instead, you go write that into your documentation, wherever that might be. It's harder if that's going to be like in the repo directly, but because you've got to pull requests. But like, let's say you've got a wiki, you write that documentation, answer the question there, and then give them a link. And so what you're doing there is the next time they're going to hopefully go search and say, I've searched, and it's not there. And now if you get a question and you know the answer is there, sometimes like guiding people to go look at that documentation, or if people say, well, our documentation's outdated. Great. We are all stewards of our documentation. You need to go update it as well. It's just part of the job. And thinking through as we launch features or complete our epics, did we document how it works? And what I tell people the most is think about it as if you're writing it so that you in 6 months, when you haven't thought about this feature, have to come back to it and there's a bug. Well, I'm not going to remember all the details then. And think if you're onboarding someone, it's going to be even harder. So yeah, you've got to make sure everything's written down, try to keep it as up to date as you can.
It's one of those things, and it's a constant battle. Like my white whale right now is getting people to write JIRA tickets in a way that makes them useful for historical search. So like, don't just put in what you did in a sentence. Put the name of the project at the front of the ticket. So that if I type in season 7 finals, I can find all the tickets for season 7 finals. And it's just something that never ends. But next year where you go looking for that ticket, you're going to love yourself for doing that. And it's one of those things that you kind of have to help people understand that.
Yeah, and putting comments into the JIRA ticket about a Slack conversation, that's to help yourself out later. Where was that later? You read it. I don't know what channel it's in anymore. Or maybe it was a group chat, and those are hard to re-find sometimes.
Right?
You remember the attendee list.
And attach it as an image, man. I don't care.
Yeah, like I think it's fine for people to have those ad hoc discussions that they need to get their work done, but just capturing what changed in the ticket is extremely helpful, because inevitably someone from leadership is going to come down and be like, why is this feature taking so long? Mm-hmm. And if you don't have any documentation in the ticket somewhere, you'll be like, oh, there was a thing, but I don't remember what the thing was because that was like 2 months ago and it just caused us a lot of problems. And they're not going to understand.
These are the things we chase. So overall for you, now that you've made the transition, you've had the joy of fighting your way into I want to say fight, shall we say strategically.
I think that's what it is.
Okay, I was gonna soften it with strategically jiggering, but if we're going for fight, we'll stay with fight. Fighting your way into a managerial position, overall, what do you think about the journey that you had to take? Like, well, first off, let's admit this, yay or nay on tape. Was your husband right that you're good at tech?
Yeah, he was right. He was right. I love just like cranking out some software and getting some tickets done and, getting a feature live. It was like such a rush. And strangely as it is, but maybe you'll appreciate this because you also work in hospitality, I just love that I could not wear shoes, especially now that I work from home. But prior to that, I was so happy that I could wear whatever I wanted to wear to work with flip-flops. Like, it sounds really silly, but it was just something that I could do.
18 hours in black sneakers.
Yeah.
Yes.
In a suit. What woman wants to wear a suit or like a tux?
No. I genuinely spent an entire summer just wearing a black skirt, black sneakers, and a tux shirt. I was like, and then when I was done with that job, I genuinely, if it wasn't for the fact it would have been a hot fire hazard, I probably would have burned that shirt, man.
I remember throwing away my last pairs of shoes, and it was
joy.
Awesome. Yeah,
I often joke I'm going to elope, because simply between doing that job and then working, when I moved to LA, I ended up working as a valet for private parties. So I did a lot of weddings there too. I'm like, yeah, dude, I've done enough weddings. I'm just going to elope when my time comes. So
I love weddings. I love working weddings. They were my favorite.
Bonus for whoever marries me, the wedding will not cost a lot.
There you go.
Right? How's that for a philosophy? Okay, so you're good. Like, you're okay with your career path, and you're glad that you made this change, even though it was a very scary risk. So would you like to talk a little bit about where you work and what you guys do? Because that business model, like I said, I found that to be a very interesting way to work in a niche that honestly I never even considered as a business niche until I started talking to you.
Yeah, so Campspot was started for wanting to be able to make it easier to find places for your RV. You want to go camping in your RV, where are you going to go? And how does it fit your RV? So I didn't know anything about RVs, and I'm still learning about RVs since I've been at Campspot. But there's like pop outs and slide outs and like pull throughs, and there's a whole lot of basically filter criteria. And so that was one of the things that made us special, is that you could put in your RV profile and you could search, and you would only see sites that would fit your RV. And so that's where we get started, and we are campground management software. And so various parks use our software, so they can have bookings, front desk, housekeeping. You want to run a golf cart, because a lot of these some of them are swanky, some of them are more rustic, but there's a variety in there. And so that's what we started as. And then a few years ago, we started our marketplace product, and that has a lot of our parks inventory on that marketplace. That sort of more like Airbnb, like you as the end camper go to it. You're looking to either do tent, lodging, or RV, and you can search within your state. We're through the US and Canada for right now. And we've had that for 3 years. That's still evolving. There aren't really that many camping OTAs. And so having our data out there is pretty awesome.
So you guys basically, just through being willing to find that niche and being primarily the first to market, you kind of own it, correct?
Yeah, we have a few competitors in that space.
Right.
Yeah, so far, I think we're doing pretty well for that marketplace. As far as the software product, again, have some competitors in the space. Some of them are newer, some of them are much older. Some of the parks that are coming to us are coming from those other systems. Our early days, a lot of the parks we had were just doing pen and paper. They didn't have a software solution. But now a lot of the parks that are coming to us are bigger. They're looking to do some revenue management, like how can I optimize how much money that I'm making? And so a couple of ways, especially in our early days, this was unique to us. I think some other people have some similar features now, but it's something we called a lock site fee. So as an end camper, I might want to pay extra because I specifically want like that spot. And so I'm okay paying extra for it. I'm going to lock it in. Well, if I don't lock it in, how we do is upon each new reservation, we sort of rejigger the grid so we can maximize the amount of nights sold. So when we move you, it's not that, like, we still keep you within your category and amenities and everything like that. So it seems fine. But yeah, if you want to, and the campground owner sets up the rules, because this is all based on how they want to set up and run their business, yeah, they could offer you a lock site fee that you could pay. And then you'd say, yep, this is definitely my cabin, because you can see it. You pick it on the map when you're booking.
So it's the equivalent of being able to choose your seat on the airline and get the window seat, or rolling the dice and seeing where you get seated.
Exactly. And the hotel industry doesn't really let you do that. So sometimes it's interesting when we're thinking through how we compare to perhaps the hotel industry, which is trying to get into glamping,
right,
and some lodging, and we have some of that inventory as well. What those differences are.
That's awesome. So in a way, like, as much as you had to kind of fight your way up, you are applying your knowledge of the hospitality industry in tech. You're just doing it through campsites and now figuring out how to, in a way, compete with the hotels that you used to work at.
Yeah, absolutely. That was a big criteria that I was looking for when I was interviewing for this, was to see if I could get back into the hospitality industry, but from the tech space, and then work for a company that was very much tech focused, as opposed to hardware focused, like the company before.
Awesome. So for you, like you've talked about how you sit down and as a manager, you like to think about how to help challenge your employees or help them grow. What do you think over the next, say, year is what you might look at in the next stages of your own career, whether it's moving up to a different managerial position or new skills that you want to onboard, or even how you want to improve yourself as a manager? Because, now you're in a place where you can stop and you can breathe and you can plan. So have you started to think about how are you gonna help yourself next?
Well, I wouldn't say that I'm in a place to stop and plan. I ride at Campspot. Sometimes I've needed to pick up teams and manage those if a manager was on leave or what have you. So there have been times where I've still been very hands-on with teams. I think really it's just the past few months that I've gone back to only managing managers and no ICs. But I think for me, it's more about I'm the only of my kind at my company, and I'm thinking through how can we look at all of the projects that we're doing? How do they relate? Is our, how to best plan for like growth? If we've got another round of explosive growth, what does that look like for our org? Are we thinking through, like, do we have the right roles? And thinking through that space.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, so that all makes sense. So I guess at this point, the question that I would have for you is, you have at least somewhat what most people would perceive as completed the journey of making a career pivot. So if you were speaking to someone who is also looking at moving from what would be considered a non-technical field into a technical job, what kind of advice would you give them, either mindset or approach or anything like that, that you think would really serve them as they make this transition?
I think it's important to remember your previous experience, what you have been doing before you made the transition. What are those strengths? Are there specific industries you're particularly interested in? And if you can, try to job shadow or at least talk to some people who are perhaps working in the types of companies, the size of companies, to sort of understand maybe what tech stack should you perhaps look at. I did not do any of that. I just went to the boot camp. But in hindsight, it would have been awesome if I had thought through what stack maybe should I learn. And again, we talked about earlier, you could totally change, but that might give you a place of where to start if you have particular companies in mind, and not downplay or just not talk about your previous skills. I see that a lot when I talk to graduates of boot camps. They're just talking about what they did in the boot camp, which is cool, and you should, but there's also 20 other kids, people in your class. So how do you make yourself different from your classmates, let alone all the other people who are trying to come into it? And I think relating those skills is the most important thing. You can probably do some time management depending upon your role. You can talk to people. Not a lot of devs necessarily want to talk to a lot of people. Maybe you can bridge that gap between product and devs when you know the technical side and can also talk to people.
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie. That's how I got my job.
It definitely helps. Sometimes you just need someone to give you a chance for your first job. And so that would be the other thing is honestly, if you are in a spot that you can do it, just take the first job that's not epically terrible. And remember just to continue searching from there, because now somebody else took a chance on you. It'll be a lot easier to get your second role.
Yeah, it is. It's the first one in, and once you have some experience, it gives you a little bit better footing. That's awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much, Beth. We really appreciate you chatting with us today. And, you can follow Beth on LinkedIn if you want, and you can check out Campspot online. Thank you so much, Beth, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.